Hey there, folks. Got an interesting article for you guys today for this episode of Bad Science Communication. This comes from Mind Matters News. Now, anybody that's familiar with Morgue, who I did a video on just recently, you'll probably recognize this site because this is one that I know that he has used before. In fact, I think in the episode whatever episode stream that he did that I covered, he cited from a Mind Matters news. So I'm not mindmatters.ai. I'm not necessarily lending these people that much credibility, but I saw this interesting title, and it's pretty short article, so I don't expect this video to be too long. But how can the universe have arisen from nothing? We are asked to examine the problem logically. Now, I'm confused because I don't think this article is really offering any of this from particularly a theistic perspective, but it seems that why are we asking how could the universe have arisen from nothing when it's always claimed that it couldn't have, and that's why we need God? It just seems a little weird there, I guess. Science writer Prudence Louise offers some realism on the topic. The question of cosmic origins is a perennially popular question, but most theists think the answer has been known for thousands of years. God is the ultimate cause of the cosmos. While there's room to disagree with that theistic conclusion, there are rational limits on the valid ways to reject it. There's also a rational limit on the valid ways to accept it, I would say as well. None of the outcomes of rejecting God are appealing. I would say most of them are. They're the sort of explanatory gaps we reluctantly accept in the wider context of our philosophical commitments. That doesn't make sense. God is something that's posited to fill in explanatory gaps in a worldview. So a naturalist doesn't need to appeal to anything beyond what we already know is there to offer potential explanations for things. We know that the natural world exists, and we know that the natural world can account for pretty much everything that we know exists in it that we've been capable of fully accounting for. So to presume that anything that we can't yet account for will be accounted for through natural means is really just the established precedent at this point. It doesn't guarantee anything, but one can reasonably assume that probably anything that we haven't explained yet will be explained through natural means. I don't see how outcomes of rejecting God are explanatory gaps. That just, I don't know. She runs through a number of ideas that sound popular in the lunchroom, but don't stand the test of careful thought. Just for example, one day science will answer the question of why the universe exists, but that's not what science does. Generally speaking, science answers how questions, not why questions. Science can tell us a lot about how things work, but to ask why things work is a matter for philosophy, not science. I think this really just matters on what exactly you mean by why. Sometimes what is meant by why is how. And it comes down to when we ask why, usually that's seeking an explanation, and explanations can be construed in one of two ways, either as a mechanistic or some sort of physical or procedural explanation, or an intentional explanation that would appeal more to an agent. So I think that's really just going to come down to what is meant by why. What does the person mean when they ask why? Louise is not a fan of Lawrence Krauss' 2013 book, A Universe from Nothing. Neither am I. It should be obvious you can't come close to nothing by talking about something, regardless of how nebulous and vacuous that something is. Nothing and something are, and always will be, direct opposites and logically exclusive of one another. I agree with that. I think that's a pretty base take right there, honestly. Now that she mentions it, the term nothing must be carefully delineated in physics, as astronomer Hugh Ross points out. Why am I not surprised they're citing Hugh Ross? Not that there's anything wrong with him. I quite like Hugh Ross, but I'm not surprised they're citing a theistic astrophysicist here. It can mean a complete lack of matter and energy. Matter, energy, and the three big cosmic space dimensions. 4. Matter, energy, and all the cosmic space dimensions. Matter, energy, and all the cosmic space and time dimensions. Matter, energy, cosmic space and time dimensions, and created non-physical entities. Matter, energy, cosmic space and time dimensions, created non-physical entities, and other dimensions of space and time. Matter, energy, cosmic space and time dimensions, created non-physical entities, and other dimensions or realms, spatial, temporal, or otherwise, or anything and everything real, created or otherwise. And he asks, so what kind of nothingness did the universe come from? I don't even understand what that's supposed to be asking. According to the space-time theorems of general relativity, not from the first 5 or possibly 6 kinds on this list. In other words, the universe could not possibly have arisen from matter, energy, and or any of the space-time dimensions associated with them, either existing or previously existing. The reason number 6 remains open to debate is that, depending on one's theological or philosophical perspective, created non-physical entities may or may not be endowed with the ability to create space-time dimensions. This language of where did the universe come from, what did the universe come from, how did the universe come from whatever it came from, I think just I think they misunderstand what cosmology is and what it seeks. I don't even think it makes sense to talk about the universe as coming from anything at all. Come from isn't a thing that the universe does. That's just not the right language to talk about the universe. We don't talk about the universe. Well, I should put that as we ought not talk about the universe as if it came from somewhere. I think that that's just not the right way to look at that. The space-time theorems also eliminate option number 9. The universe of matter, energy, space, and time is, in itself, an effect. Well, I would need to hear an argument for that. I think that's a presupposition more than anything. Why should I be committed to the idea that the universe is itself an effect? Especially when it doesn't really seem... I mean, if we just apply our understanding of basic everyday objects to the universe, I think most people can recognize that there are stark differences and that the universe, what we mean when we say the universe, isn't really something that we're permitted to speak about in the same way that I might speak of my cell phone or a cup. The universe just isn't an object like that. Every effect is generated by a cause. Well, no, I don't think so. Well, I suppose it depends on how you define effect, though. Because if you define effect as a thing that comes from a cause, then yes. But if an effect is just any event which occurs, whether or not it comes or was instantiated by something prior to it, then it seems to me that you could have effects without causes. I guess it just depends on what one means by effect in this instance. Absolute nothingness, the complete lack of anything and everything, cannot be a cause or causal agent. That is ruled out by definition and also by observation. I would agree with that. If absolute nothingness could spontaneously produce something, scientists would see somethings arising everywhere. Instead, they see the consistent operation of the first law of thermodynamics, which says the total amount of matter and energy within the universe can neither be increased nor decreased. Don't really have any objections with anything there. Louise comes to the same sort of conclusion, though from a different perspective. Every single thing we know of has a cause for its existence, not one exception. That's a lot of evidence for things having causes, except I do think there are exceptions, though. I think that, and I know that there's some people that would disagree with this, but I think, there is a discussion to be had that goes a little bit more deeply into the metaphysics of causation than what I'll likely go into in this video. But just tabling that for now, I certainly think that there's a very reasonable case to be made that there are numerous events in quantum mechanics at the quantum scale of reality that are properly acausal. For me, this comes down to how I think most people talk about causality, what it is we largely understand causality as being. And it seems to me that what we can do is we can split things happening in terms of necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. The necessary conditions are all of the conditions under which the event may or may not happen, but that do not produce the event themselves. They're just the conditions under which the event could happen if it did. The sufficient conditions are the conditions that which bring that event, instantiate that event actually happening when it does. And it seems that when we talk about causes for things, what we're referring to are not the necessary conditions, but the sufficient conditions. So let me provide a little bit of an example here. It might be a slight bit contrived, but I think it makes the point. I have a cup sitting, I've still got a bit of coffee in it sitting on this table. Now, a cat could jump on the table and knock the cup of coffee over. And if you walked into the room and asked me, well, what caused the cup of coffee to spill over? And I said, the cup. You would look at me and go, wait, what? I mean, you have to have a cup before you can have a cup of something to be tipped over. But how did the cup cause itself to tip over? Or I could answer, oh, well, gravity. And while that's perhaps maybe a little bit more accurate, it's still, well, of course you need gravity for the cup to fall over, but gravity isn't what caused the cup to fall over. If that were the case, cups would fall over of their own accord all the time, because there was just gravity decided to do that. We don't really see that happening. Obviously, gravity isn't really the answer there. But if I said, oh, my cat jumped on the table, it knocked it over, then that makes sense. And that sort of paints a difference between the necessary conditions, the cup, gravity, and the sufficient conditions, the cat knocking it over. And if we grant that things happening with perhaps only necessary conditions but no sufficient conditions are properly acausal, as I would say, then I think that, yes, we can say that there are events. There are acausal events. There are events which occur with no cause. A really good example of this, I would say, would be the production of an electron-positron pair from a photon just stochastically decaying into an electron-positron pair. There are no sufficient conditions for this happening. Now, of course, there's necessary conditions. I mean, you need the photon, you need the electromagnetic field, you need the electron field, but none of these things are sufficient for this event to occur. They're only necessary for it to occur. So this idea that we have no exceptions for events occurring acausally, I don't think is correct. But again, there is a lot more that could be broken into in terms of the metaphysics of causation, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, at least not in this video. And it doesn't help the naturalist to say maybe the universe is eternal. Telling us how long something has existed isn't an explanation for why it exists rather than not. Well, I agree with that, at least prima facie, but it seems that what the naturalists would say is, if they were proposing that the universe were eternal, would just be that, well, it doesn't make any sense to ask why it existed. It just does. It always has and always will. Kind of the answer that's given for God. Now, the thing is, the fact that telling us how long something has existed isn't an explanation for why it exists is exactly why there are still a fair amount of theists and apologists who don't really care for the Kalam cosmological argument much. The universe could still be eternal, and that means nothing for God's existence. Now, maybe a universe with a beginning, you would expect more if God existed than a universe that's eternal, and I personally don't see why you would. I don't think God can really... Personally, I think it's just difficult to use God to establish counterfactuals like that. Like, what would we expect to see if God did exist versus if God did not exist? Because it at least seems to be the case, because a lot of theists essentially end up arguing that you could expect to see pretty much anything and everything given God's existence. It's all compatible with God's existence, and I think that that's part of the reason why God isn't really an explanation. It's an ill-defined concept that struggles to ground counterfactuals, and for that reason it can't really account for why things are the way that they are, because if they were different, you could just say God wanted it to be that way instead. You can't. There's no way to account for why things are the way they are with God. And it doesn't help to say while everything within the universe has a cause, maybe the universe itself doesn't have one. The universe isn't something over and above everything we know of. It isn't some distinct thing. The universe is just a word to describe the collection of all the stuff we know of, all of which has causes. Well, we just got done talking about that. I disagree. But other than that, I do think I largely agree with the rest of this. At least at this part, the universe isn't something over and above everything we know of. It isn't some distinct thing like I was mentioning earlier. That's why we can't really talk about the universe like we would talk about things like a phone or a cup or a cat or a house or a car or a person or a tree or even a planet or even a star or a galaxy. The universe just, sure, we can call it an object, but it's not an object in the way that we would typically think of one. And I think that's something that oftentimes slips people's minds. So, if people believe that the universe can come into existence without any cause, there are several perspectives from which we can express reasonable doubt. Well, sure, but I think that a lot of, at least naturalists like myself, would say that the universe doesn't have a cause for its existence because the universe isn't the thing that ever had a moment of ontic actualization, so to speak. There wasn't a moment where the universe arises into a state of being or enters into a state of being such that there would need to be some instantiator or actualizer of that event. That the universe is this tenselessly existing four-dimensional space-time block that's just there, perhaps bounded at one end, and that's all. That's the view that I would take. The universe is sort of a brute contingency. So I think that I don't think that a naturalist really has a problem in accounting for the universe. This idea of why is there something rather than nothing, I think honestly is really a meaningless question. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. How do you answer a question like that? It just seems to be the wrong question to ask, I guess. You may also wish to read Why Physicalism is Failing. You know what? Maybe in the next episode. Maybe in the next episode we'll do that. We'll cover why physicalism is failing us, because you gotta remember, guys, physicalism, that isn't gonna account for anything. Physicalism certainly can't ground counterfactuals. You can't account for anything with physicalism. That model, methodological empiricism, the scientific methodologies. Are you kidding me? That's never explained anything. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed our little examination of this article here as to, can the universe have arisen out of nothing? No, because I don't think the universe arises. I don't think that's the right way to talk about the universe. So if you enjoyed this video, you are free to like it and share it with your friends if you'd like. Comment down below if you have any thoughts, and as always, through reason, we progress.